You're listening to the Career Jump podcast. Insights, interviews, and success stories to inspire and give you the edge when you make your next career jump. Hosted by your career concierge, Andrew McCaskill.
Hello and welcome back to the Executive Career Jump podcast. I'm your host and career concierge, Andrew McCaskill, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Sarah Fitton. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm great. Thanks, Andrew. How are you?
We're really good. We're really good. So full disclosure, Sarah and I know each other and have partnered on various projects recently, and I've been really keen to get you on for a while. So thanks for giving up your time. Just for those of you that aren't aware of Sarah, and for those of you that aren't connected with Sarah, tell us a little bit about you and your background and the type of work you get involved with.
Yeah, okay. So, there's a little clue behind me for those who are seeing me on screen. So I run Coach Me to Success. It's a career coaching and job seeker support business. It's something that I've only recently started, actually. I've got quite a different background, I suppose. I started my life working in the project environment many years ago and running large business analyst teams for a number of global firms, and just really discovered my love of people management and developing people through that. But increasingly found that being in a project environment, the pressure was always on the project delivery, and those really nice bits of the role that I loved, which was developing people, were always being cut away. So I made a big career change a few years ago and just left a job with nothing to go to, took a leap of faith to move into HR, did a course to qualify as a career counsellor, and had some FTC contracts in HR, specifically in employee engagement, which is a real passion of mine because it ties in with, I think it ties in with so much, making sure that people are happy at work and they do their best job when they're happy. But sadly, that was an FTC and it finished right slap bang in the middle of the pandemic. So there I was back in the job seeking world. But I ended up running a job seeking support group with a career coach and found myself spending far more time helping and coaching others on their job search than I was spending on my own. Was encouraged by people like you and some others to say, well, look, just go for it. Why don't you do it? And here I am. That's what I'm doing.
And how do you feel about that decision now?
There's so many emotions that come, I think, with starting a business. It's amazing to be doing this and supporting people because it's tough out there at the moment, and anything I can do to help it's really fulfilling and I really enjoy it. But obviously it comes with all the trappings of starting a new business and being brave enough to start. It's not just about what you're good at in terms of the coaching. There's the marketing, there's the setup, there's the finances. There's so many other things that actually have to wrap around that you've got to get to grips with. That it's been a bit of a roller coaster, if I'm honest. I think I'm 2-3 months in. I can't even remember.
No, I think that's a very common feeling and a very honest reflection. I haven't pre-warned you that I'm going to ask you this, so apologies for springing it on you. But where you've made a couple of big moves there, because you made the move out of the big project management career that you were doing, and then you've obviously made the move into self-employment. How did you manage to mentally get the courage to do that? Like, how did you manage to break away from what wasn't working for you into what was working for you? Because I think it's a really big leap to make.
It is a big leap. So the first leap, and I remember talking to somebody about this, and I said, I'm really risk averse. And they just looked at me as if I was mad and said, well, clearly you're not, because just look what you've done to yourself. You just left a job with nothing to go to. But I think certainly I see this a number of people around my age, that you reach a point where you think, am I really following my passion? Am I following my why? And I've got maybe another 20, 25 years of this. Is this where I want to be? And my mum hadn't been very well, and I took a little bit of a restock. My role was changing again at work, and I thought, do you know what? I need something different. And I'm not going to achieve that if I just sit here and kind of tinker around the edges. Let's just go all in. So that's what I did with the first career change. The most recent one, I think, because I was doing a lot of the type of work that I was going to move into with the coaching, that was a much softer landing. So it was more about being brave enough to put myself out there and make that shift between supporting people for free and actually doing something which was a paid business and dealing with all the trappings that comes with that, like the imposter syndrome, which everybody talks about, but it is real and it's alive and kicking, and something I find happens quite regularly. So I think for me, it's just, if you're driven with something and you see you want to make a change, sometimes you've just got to find it within you to do it. and surrounding yourself with people who are going to support you and encourage you. Because there's always going to be some who say, oh, do you know what? I wouldn't do that. It might not work. Yeah, but it might. Let's not look at it might not work. Let's tell ourselves we can make a go of this. And do you know what? If it doesn't work, you do another pivot. It's not the end of the world.
Absolutely. And you can't let people transfer their own anxieties onto you, can you?
No.
Like when somebody's saying that might not work, what they mean is, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what they mean. Yeah. So I think that's really important. Well, I have a lot of respect for the fact that you've made those moves, and good on you. So let's get into it then. So most of our listeners, as you know, are very much leaders in transition, the type of people that you and I interact with and help all the time. So let's talk LinkedIn first of all.
Yes.
You've increased your usage of the platform over the last 12 months significantly and spent a lot of time in there. What's your thoughts in terms of what people in transition can be doing on LinkedIn and your key learnings been over the last 12 months?
Well, I'd take it back even further than the 12 months, actually, to my first major career change a few years back, in that LinkedIn, I think most people just use it when they need a job, and they don't think much about it. And because of that, they don't know enough about how it can work for them. And the biggest thing for me, I think, was building out a good network, using that network, not just building it out, but actually making use of it. I think a lot of the time people are really nervous to ask for help. They're nervous about saying they need help. They're nervous about saying they're out of a job. They see there's some sort of negative stigma attached to it. I mean, I'm hoping the last year with so many people out of work that's reduced a bit, but I think some people still hold on to that. But one of my top tips would be ask for help. I was amazed at how many people were willing to spare some time for me. So I obviously had a project management based network. I needed to move it to an HR one at the time. And I followed people. I built my network wherever I could. I joined groups, and I saw people who either had made a transition into HR themselves from a similar sort of background to me, or just something that was very different around the similar sort of age, or people who were at the top of their game in HR and saying, look, can I have some time with you? Because if you were looking at somebody like me, what would I need to do to convince you that I'm a great hire? Or where do you see my skill set really adding some value to your organisation? Or people who've done it before, how did you do it? What tips do you have for someone trying to make the same break? And the amount of support I got was incredible. I probably had more support from strangers than people I knew already. So that would be my biggest tip to people.
Yeah. And I think that's such a huge blocker for people, the asking for help. But it's a real compliment to ask somebody for help.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? And there's been studies done on this. That one thing I read was they did a study around neighbours. This was in the US. And what they did was when people moved in and became new neighbours, they put 3 strategies in place. Some didn't engage with their neighbours at all. Some did something to help their neighbour. So they maybe took round, some muffins or whatever and said,
or casserole or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Lasagna or whatever it might have been. So they did that kind of gesture. And the third group found a reason at some point in the first 2 weeks of moving in to ask their neighbour for help. And out of those 3 groups, the neighbours were surveyed on how much they trusted their new neighbours. And the ones who had asked for help over-indexed in terms of the depth of the relationship that they built. Whereas we think, and it's not a bad thing to pay it into the ecosystem and help other people, absolutely not at all. But actually, one of the biggest compliments you can pay and one of the biggest ways you can build relationships is to ask for help.
Yeah, definitely.
Is to give people that opportunity, right? So, really, really good point on that. So ask for help if you're listening. Be brave enough to do that. You'll generally receive a fantastic response. Once you've received that help, another key part of the puzzle is the dreaded CV, right? So again, you spent a lot of time helping people with these. Give us your kind of top CV tips. What are you seeing? What's working? What advice would you have?
The biggest thing I see is people listing still, I mean, this is how people used to do CVs, but it's changed, is listing a job load of responsibilities or spending too much time explaining what it is that they do. Because especially if you're going for a similar role to one you've done in the past, people have got a pretty good idea about what that involves. They want to know, when you were doing that, what was it that made a difference? What did you achieve? What the people that you were working for, what value did they get out of you being their employee? And people don't focus enough on their achievements. I think some because they just don't think that way. They're scared of selling themselves. I hear so many times, I'm hopeless at selling myself. I don't like selling myself. It feels really uncomfortable. And my tip for that is try and divorce it from you a little bit. Don't think of it as you're selling you. You're selling what you can do and your results and your outcomes. And I know it's a very subtle difference, but for me, it's not about trying to say I'm the big I am. It's letting those results speak for themselves. So that's the biggest tip I'd have for people. And to do that, I think you need to ask for help, whether it's from a CV writer, whether it's from a coach, whether it's just people you've worked in the past, or looking through old testimonials or old annual appraisals, and just getting a feel for what others have praised you for and what you've done, because you forget it. Unless you're the sort of person that captures it in a weekly or monthly log, you're not going to remember. So, I mean, that's a tip for anybody who's working right now, is keep on top of your achievements as they're happening. Don't make it an exercise 5 years down the line when you're trying to remember what the hell it was that you did and how you did it.
Well, that's a great tip, because we spend a lot of time trying to help people remember what they did 4 or 5 years ago, and it's making sure that it's accurate. That's a brilliant tip. Very good.
Hey everybody, it's Andrew here. Just wanted to very briefly interrupt this podcast episode to tell you a little bit more about our Career Jump Club. So our Career Jump Club was created to help job seekers understand what they want and how to get it, right? So becoming a club member is a great move if you're looking to get the clarity and confidence in order to secure your next role. With the membership, you get a number of different things. So first thing you get is access to our online platform, which has over 30 videos, 40, 50 different templates, workbooks, and it takes you through everything from sort of understanding what you want to how to position your CV and LinkedIn, how to interview, how to close offers and negotiate better salaries, a full end-to-end job search course effectively for senior leaders. So you get that, you get a fortnightly group coaching call, which is with me and with the other members, where we bounce around best practice, share slide decks, share techniques, and share the latest data on what's working for people. And you get to, most importantly, become part of our closed LinkedIn group and our closed community. And in there is where the magic often happens, because you get people referring each other into opportunity, supporting each other, and just sharing. And that's what it's all about. So if you're financially able and you'd like to invest in your job search, head on over to www.careerjump.com, all one word, /club, and you'll find the landing page and come and give it a go. We'll see you in there. Anyway, back to the pod.
So we've done our networking, we've leveraged LinkedIn, we've got people helping us, our CV is achievement orientated, and so naturally now we're starting to get some interviews.
Yes.
Right? We're out there interviewing. Now, one really quick thing before we get into general interviewing, you did a talk recently as part of the Easter Job Hunt, which was really well received, which is in these new types of interviews we're seeing, which are the one-way interviews. Can you just explain a little bit more about one-way interviews to our listeners, and then go into some of the, top level content that you shared in that presentation?
Yeah, of course. No problem. I mean, I know this is a topic that tends to very much divide the job seeker community. You're either someone who wants to go for it or someone who just thinks that is a complete and utter abomination and you don't want to touch it with the barge pole. So yeah, part of the session I did a couple of weeks ago was to try and demystify the process a little bit, because we've all had face-to-face interviews, and even if you've not had a Zoom interview before, you've probably got a pretty good idea what that's going to involve, haven't you? But the one-way interview is just a complete myth to most people, and mystery. So essentially, someone has pre-recorded a set of questions. It may be that they're presenting them to you on a screen, or it may be that they've gone and recorded them themselves to make it a little bit more human. And you log on to a portal, and these questions are presented at you, and you record your answers over a webcam. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. In practice, some people will allow you to have a limited thinking time. They'll present the question, and you get to think about it. Others will present the question, and they'll give you this lovely big countdown in the middle of the screen, telling you you've only got a few seconds left before you're going to be propelled into the recording, and you're going to have to find an answer. That's quite scary, so it's good to be prepared for that. And the other side of it is the actual answers themselves. So they can be set for you to have as little as 45 seconds to answer, or several minutes, And thinking back to your presentation, Andrew, you talked a lot about waffling, which is such a big issue for people. You cannot waffle when you're in one of these things, because you get cut off. It simply reaches the end of the recording time and that's it. The next one's presented and that 30-second countdown begins and you've lost the chance. So particularly if you're getting those questions on competency-based questions and you're used to that STAR format, and I think most of us encourage people to get to the action and the result as soon as possible, you've got to do that in these types of interviews, because you could still be setting the context of what was happening before you get booted onto the next question if you're not careful.
Wow. Sounds quite high pressured as well.
It does feel quite high pressured if it's one where you've got lots of timing. So I've gone through them myself a few times, and the first time was a nice gentle introduction. I had unlimited thinking time. I could re-record my answers up to 5 times and I could play them back and decide which one I wanted to pick. But a lot of them don't give you that luxury. So if you get invited to one of these, definitely prepare. So ask actually, if you can. So one of the things I didn't do when I went through it was ask people what the format was going to be like. How much time will I have? Will I be able to re-record? I went in completely blind and that was terrifying. So don't make the same mistake I did. Ask if you can. If they're willing to share with you how the format's going to work, then you're armed with some useful information. So if you know you've got unlimited thinking time, then you've got time to make notes. You can really put some effort into your answers. But don't do what someone said to me. They said they had 7 questions with 45 seconds to answer and unlimited prep time, unlimited recording, and they spent 3 hours before they were happy with what to submit, which is a little bit excessive. So I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, find out what you're going to be facing. And then if you know it's 45 seconds or 2 minutes, practice. You've got your framework then, you know what you need to work with. That would be my biggest tip there.
Really, really good tips. And, you know, the whole idea of clarifying further and seeking more context works in a face-to-face interview as well, right? Like,
yeah, but how many do it? How many people do it? You're like, oh, I've got the invite, and you just roll up to it, don't you? The majority of people.
Yeah, and actually in the interview itself, if somebody says to you, oh, can you tell us about, you know, how you manage stakeholders or something like that, like something broad, it's well worth that extra clarification of course, more than happy to do that. I manage stakeholders all the time. What type of scenario would be most of use to you? Yeah,
absolutely. The stakeholder one is one where I really encourage people, because it might be you're in an environment where stakeholders are really tough and they don't like what your department, especially when I was working in projects, sometimes people had a really poor impression of IT and their ability to deliver on time. And they were really hard work to work with because they just didn't rate you. So if that's an environment you're going into, it's useful to know that, to give that sort of example. But if that isn't the environment and you start talking about tough stakeholders and then you get to the end of it, they're like, well, we're actually quite nice here. It's fallen a bit flat, isn't it? So qualifying up front, definitely worth it.
Indeed. So these one-way interviews then, like fast forward 10 years, right? Maybe you've decided that actually you want to take, somebody's come and bought Coach Me to Success for Millions, of course, and you've decided, actually, I'm going to go and do a HRD role. So I'm going to jump back into industry to take everything that you've learned from building your own business out and from all the coaching that you've done and apply it back client side, for want of a better expression. Do you think you would use that type of technology if you were sat on the other side?
I personally don't think I would, but it might depend what sort of business I'm in. So I think if you're doing high volume, low skilled recruitment and you've got huge numbers of people to sift through, it might be beneficial. It does save a lot of time for people. You've got the advantage that you can forward these videos on to other people to look at, to make decisions. So I suppose if you're really time strapped as a business and you're struggling with finding the time to do those initial sifting interviews, then I might consider it. But I'm personally not a fan. I know I help people through them and I do coaching on it, but I think they're very impersonal. I don't think you get the best out of people. I mean, that example we gave about the stakeholder management, you want to qualify it, don't you? Who do you qualify it with when all you're doing is talking to a computer screen? There's nobody there. There's nobody to explain the context or validate something with you. So yeah, I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't advocate for them.
Interesting. Yeah. And, I think that's my natural inclination as well. Without wanting just to agree on everything, I do agree on that. And I think the big reason behind it is that I could imagine you could get people who are really good at their job, but would just not perform very well in that scenario. And so therefore it's not a reliable way of predicting future success.
Well, absolutely. And I've never been a fan of the kind of pressure test interview where you put people under so much pressure to see whether they can crack. I mean, if anybody watches The Apprentice and you look at the interview style there, yeah, it's very entertaining for us as a viewer, but it's not the way you're going to get the best out of people. There's ways of picking up on issues with somebody's CV without making them feel about that small. 100%.
And it should be a two-way process, as you and I advocate on LinkedIn regularly. I do love the interview episode on The Apprentice, though. It's the best.
Oh, it's my favourite one. Yeah, I won't deny it. I do love it, but I wouldn't put anybody through that myself.
Agreed. So good, really, really good insights on that one-way interview thing. And I just like the fact that you've, thought about that deeply, and that you're sharing stuff to help people, because whether you and I would use it or not, I think we're going to see more and more of it. That's
Well, I agree with you. I mean, it's one particular provider who I looked at had said that they'd seen a 25% increase in the past 12 months with COVID. And I think so much of us have switched to online mechanisms that not all of them are going to fall back again once we get back to face-to-face, because they've been too convenient. And yeah, as you say, my personal feelings on them are kind of by the by in terms of the work that I do, because they're out there, people are being invited to them, they need to be equipped with how to handle them, so that's why I'm there to help.
Yeah, so they passed that Sarah helps them get through the one-way interview nightmare, and now they get in to meet a human.
Shocker.
I know, who'd have thought. So they're in front of this human. What do people need to be thinking about then?
And this is something that applies to the video interviews a little bit as well. I tell people that they need to make sure they've got their smiling game face on before the recording starts. But having some energy, having some positivity when you're going into an interview. There's nothing worse from my perspective as an interviewer when everything you ask someone, you get kind of the Eeyore on the other side of the desk, like, oh, well, that was such a trial, or this was so difficult, or so-and-so was such a nightmare to work with. That having some energy and positive spin to your interview, I think it's personally, I find that really important. Having some good questions, I know you and I agree on this one as well, making sure that when you get to that bit at the end, when you're meant to be interested in the job, what questions have you got for us? No, I haven't got anything. Well, it may be that they've covered everything during the interview, but find something to ask. And the other trick, and I used to use this when I was being interviewed, I'd normally take a portfolio in with me, which had my CV and cover letter and details about the role. And I'd list my questions in the back, so that when it got to that point, it's like, well, I think we have answered quite a few, but let me just check over what we've covered and what I've got left. So that also shows the level of preparation and that you've been paying attention to things that have been covered. So I think that's a useful tip, to actually have your questions written down so you can refer to them potentially as well.
Yeah, well, I put out a post about whether or not you should go in with a pen and pad.
Oh, that caused a bit of a stir, didn't it? That divided the room. Well, I remember in my early career being sent to an assessment centre, and I had this binder with me. I've still got the same leather portfolio that I use now that I had 20 odd years ago, and I had it right next to me on the floor. And the chap, obviously there was something in my body language when I was answering with examples that I'd got in this portfolio. I must have been subconsciously kind of looking at it, and he said to me, and this was one of those pressure type interviews, he said, look, can you not cope without what's in that? He said, can you not cope without it, because there's something in there that's obviously a huge crutch for you. And I don't know whether I'd be brave enough to do this now, but I actually said, I can manage without it perfectly fine, thank you. And I lifted it up and I just kind of threw it behind me, just like to the back of the room.
Love it.
But I got offered the job. Sometimes you have to be brave, don't you? I think if you're given one of those personalities that likes to push you a bit, often they just want someone to show a little bit of life and push back rather than just kind of cower into oblivion. So sometimes...
I definitely was guilty of that. Sometimes if I really liked a candidate, I'd reject them to see if they fought for it.
Ow.
Yeah, which I'm not sure I would do now. But to not fully reject them, as in formally reject them from the process, but maybe just say at the end of the interview, look, I've been great meeting you. I'm just not sure it's going to fully work. And then see what happened.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, I was hiring salespeople into a commercial environment.
Right. Yeah, no, it's very different.
Yeah. The people who planted their feet and went, well, you're wrong. Why do you think that?
Yeah.
How can I alleviate those concerns? Which bit have I missed in order for you to feel like that? You were just like, well, actually, I think you're great. But I just wondered how you deal with that. So people do test you, and it's important to plant your feet. It's 50-50, like we keep saying. Don't forget it's 50-50. Yeah. It's really important. And plant your feet. Good. Right, we're going to get into some more quickfire stuff now, if that's okay. All. I think you've shared some tremendous value already. So we'll start with anything that you're reading or listening to at the moment that's adding value to your life.
Okay, so at the moment I'm in the middle of a postgraduate diploma in HR, so I'm drowning in journals and textbooks. But one thing I have picked up, I haven't got too far through it yet, but it's something called the Squiggly Career, which I think quite a few people are aware of. It's by a lady called Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis. And although I haven't got too far through the content, just the title of it, the Squiggly Career, just really appealed to me. My own career has taken lots of different turns. And I think the days of when we expected to join an organisation and have that very straight up linear career, normally in the same organisation, people had the job for life, that's what they aimed for. That's gone by the wayside. And I think some people worry when they've had a career that's taken a few twists and turns. And it's becoming a lot more mainstream. So I just love the idea of the title, that somebody's recognising that and teaching people how that doesn't need to be an issue.
100%. Love the Squiggly Career, and I've had an equally squiggly one, so that works well. So I'm part of the Squiggly Career Club. And what about a quote? Any particular quote that means something to you?
Okay, well, the biggest quote at the moment, I'd say, is feel the fear and do it anyway. I've actually forgotten what it's like to live in my comfort zone. And I think being out of work is one of the things that is out of comfort zone for so many people. And to really push yourself out of that, to do things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of, or do things that you're not comfortable with, are the ways that you're going to stand out amongst the competition. So definitely feel the fear and do it anyway is my mantra right now. And I think it should be something that a lot of job seekers take on board as well. Awesome.
Absolutely love that. You've made some bold moves and we've spoken about that. So when should somebody leave a job?
Oh, do you know what? There's so many factors at play. The biggest thing for me is to not wait until you're in the depths of despair, because that shows, I think, in the way you approach your job search. It shows you're just so downtrodden that you don't know how to sell yourself anymore, and you're in a bit of a pit. So there's some warning signs for me. I think if you're finding it's not meeting your values, that's one of the biggest things for me, when you're finding a bit of a values mismatch. And if they're values that you're not prepared to compromise, you might as well cut ties, because that's not going to change. When you find yourself, being a disruptive influence, when you're that person who does nothing but moan about everything. I remember in one of my first jobs I was unhappy with, there were a bunch of us that we just moaned all the time. I said, look, this isn't helping us. We either do something to change the position so that we don't have to moan, or we just cut our losses and run, because moaning isn't helping us. It's not helping the people around us. So definitely, if you find that you're being more negative at work than positive, that's a big red flag for me.
Yeah. When you kind of recognize that you've become part of the problem almost.
Oh, yes, definitely. Or for me, when I was working in an organisation where I actually felt guilty recruiting people into my team, because I felt it was such a toxic environment. It didn't feel fair to bring people I liked and wanted to work with into it. That was a really big one for me.
That's a really, really good point. I think a lot of people have been in that seat before. I always talk about if the breaking points for me have been where I've been having to pass something on from above that I didn't believe in.
Oh, that you fundamentally disagree with. Yeah.
And it's not just a strategy thing. If we were going strategically, it's something normally values, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
But when you've sold the dream to a team and they fall into you and you've got that trust in place, and then you feel yourself regularly passing on messages that you don't believe, that's tough, right? That's where burnout.
That's really hard.
Comes in. Yeah. But no, really good insights. I get the. I think you're really self-aware, actually, based on...
I couldn't tell you.
You are? Are you self-aware enough to know that you're self-aware?
Yeah, no, I'm joking. It's nice that you say that. I'd like to think that I am, because I think that really helps when you're trying to make a move, and also in the job search, just to be aware of your skills and your development areas. It's a bonus. So thank you.
It's a huge bonus, and I feel like I've learned that about you in this conversation. So being self-aware, what do you think, just to finish off the chat, what do you think will be the next skills that you look to develop yourself?
Well, I had a big thing at the beginning of this year to be more comfortable doing live stuff, so videos and podcasts. Well, so here I am. I'm fulfilling the dream on that one, and I was on the Easter job hunt the other week. So all things throwing myself out of my comfort zone. What next? I mean, I've only just started, really. I've got so many ideas buzzing around in my head. So I think for me, there's an element of just focusing on where I am for a bit without trying to run before I can walk. But ultimately, I mean, one of the things I'd like to move to next is doing a little bit more at a group level. So as I said, I had a job seeker support group last year, and currently I'm doing more one-to-one stuff. But being able to expand that reach to more people is something I'd like to focus on by the end of the year, definitely.
Tremendous. Excellent. Any final comments for people in transition? Any last tips before we wrap the call?
I mean, people who are really in transition, who want to do something different, like I did a few years ago, and going back to that self-awareness point, get really clear on your transferable skills and be really clear on your story. Because if you can present that story about why you want to change with passion and conviction, and you can get in front of people to tell it, that makes a huge difference to those who are going to support you and how successful you're going to be in making that transition happen sooner rather than later. Lovely
note to finish on. Tremendous. For people listening who want to follow up with you, where can they find you? How can they get hold of you?
I am living on LinkedIn. So find me there. Sarah Fitton or Job Search Success Coach is my tagline. So just come and find me on there. Drop me a note.
Well, make sure you do. I think you've shared a huge amount of value. Thank you, genuinely.
You're welcome.
I'm glad that you're diving onto these podcasts and these webinars and have thrown yourself out of your comfort zone, because I think you've got a lot to offer, and the values behind what you do really shine through. So thank you so much for what you're doing. Keep up the great work. If you're listening, keep at it. Keep at your job search. Take on board some of the great stuff that Sarah's spoken about. Link in with her directly if you're not, and we'll catch you all next time. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Career Jump podcast with Andrew McCaskill. For more resources and information, just head over to the Career Jump website at www.execcareerjump.com to supercharge your job search and start making moves. Let's get to work.